film to video games to music, interactive web, things like that. So the Austin Chamber is really the lead organization in Austin for driving economic growth and prosperity.
Great, and what I want to talk to you about in just a moment is how you have an incubator that's funded $1 billion?
Almost
From the city. And Zing is here now. Right. That's exciting. Okay.
Among other things.
So, Sean, you came down from New York.
Yeah, I'm a lawyer actually. I specialize in video games. In fact, I teach a class on video game law at a law school in New York. I'm with the international firm of Pillsbury from Shaw Pittman. We have 800 lawyers all over the world, but I'm part of their video game team, which is about 35 attorneys that just specialize in this space. I was asked to be here because I recently wrote white papers on tax incentives available in the U.S. and Canada, which, to the extent anyone wants them, please drop a card. I'm happy to send them to you. But basically, that's what I do. I help companies with issues when developing video games, whether it is virtual currency issues, whether it is where to set up their companies to best deal with incentives or other business purposes.
Yeah. So Sean's got obviously great depth of expertise in this. It's growing rapidly. In Louisiana, we have a program to incentivize companies. Texas has 20-some odd other states. Not to mention our good neighbors in Canada.
Seems to be no reputation. Hi, Ian Kelso. I work for the industry in Canada. My full-time job is actually with the province of Ontario. We are an association of about 300 companies in the province. I also speak on behalf of our sister organization. We have 7 trade organizations across Canada and representing about 1,200 companies. And so our primary job is to interface with government and make sure that we keep those tax incentives, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about as the panel goes on. We also do a lot of intercompany networking. We help companies get into foreign markets and export. And our primary role is really to create the best possible business environment for the companies that are in our membership.
Joaquin, let's go back and talk about those. Just to also point out, you guys have a booth here at Southwest Southwest. You're going to be part of the Technology Day. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's on Thursday.
And that's a 2-hour slot where you're showcasing what Cityworks doing.
That is correct. It's on Thursday. It's part of the Technology Summit.
Okay, great. Well, what are the tools you guys have? Companies that come to Singapore, that are in Singapore, grants and things like that.
Well, so maybe I would just talk about it a little bit more general. In the past, Singapore, when we became independent, right, in 1965, it was relatively a low-cost place to do business. And a lot of North American companies relocated operations to Singapore to leverage on the low cost. Well, Singapore is one of the most expensive places in Asia, maybe even the world, to do business today. So we're not playing the sort of low-cost arbitrage type of game anymore, but really as transforming ourselves into a knowledge-based economy, right? You have to use different kinds of tools and incentives. Now, of course, for a long time, Singapore has used things like a low tax rate, preferential tax rates, and even subsidies and grants, right, to attract some of the best and brightest people and companies to relocate to Singapore. But and that exists today. But I think that increasingly, every country, not just Singapore, if you go to Malaysia, if you go to China, if you go to, every government there's a hunger to attract these knowledge-based companies, companies that generate intellectual property into their countries. So that doesn't differentiate your geography anymore from the others, because what you can give, everybody else can give or more. And so the Singapore government has started thinking a little bit more sophisticated. So yes, tax rate is Singapore 7%. There are some grants for entrepreneurs who want to relocate to the country, but also the thinking, starting to think what are supports that an entrepreneur may need or a young company may need. Things like how can you test bed some of your technology with the government or in the country, right? So things like infrastructure becomes very important, right? If you start to build a broadband wireless infrastructure, for example, national wireless infrastructure, or you start to put fiber into every school or every home, right? Those are kinds of things that will become the next level of differentiation for countries and for states.
I think it's important to point out there's sort of two ways this goes. There's reaching out to companies and bringing them to where you are, and of course, building the ecosystem, as people say. In Singapore, it's been called the economic miracle over the last 4 decades. Tony, tell us about the Austin economic miracle.
I appreciate the compliment, Elliot. The Austin economic miracle is probably due in most part to the University of Texas. Austin's a great place to live. Obviously, you can walk up and down the street and find music any day of the week. There's lots of great food, and the housing's cheap, and it's cheap to run a business. But the companies that come here, the Facebooks, the Disneys, the Zyngas, the Googles for a while.
And those companies aren't here, right?
Those companies are here in some form or fashion. Electronic Arts and Blizzard, and those companies come here for a specific reason. That reason is talent. So if you're talking about incentives in your community and you're talking about incentives as a deal closing mechanism, that's exactly what they are. They're just icing on the cake. So that the company is probably never going to choose your community over another because the incentives are great or because the tax breaks are great. Those are things that happen in the last 5% of the company's decision. So that the companies mainly decide on where they want to go because the talented people are there and they're potentially cheap talented people. And I mean that in that the place is so great that they'll work for less. And that the people will stick together on technology teams that mean you don't have a lot of turnover and a lot of cycling. So it's really easy to build products or services there.
Absolutely.
If I can talk about that for a second, that's actually very true. I mean, I'm probably the one person here who is not tied to any particular jurisdiction for their incentives. I'm basically able to talk about all of them and have I don't get any benefits from any of them from doing it.
Benefits from all action.
You know, that being said, I mean, that's, you know, in the US, one of the places where you can get the most incentives is a place that, you know, a lot of people don't want to build a studio. And that's because, you know, there's not really talent there. It's not the best area in the world, you know, and it's just, you know, people are not going to necessarily just take that just for, you know, for the money. Because, I mean, it doesn't help if you're getting all this, you know, this offset, but you can't find people to work for you.
Okay, Sean, how's it trending right now? There's some states who are doing more, some that are, you know, pulling back, so to speak.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's a state by state basis. I mean, there's several locations that are kind of like, you know, just starting in this process. You know, you've got North Carolina, which just this year, you know, starting in 2011, it's just starting to offer an incentive. You've got Massachusetts, which basically it has a bill going through right now to potentially offer incentives. But on the flip side, you also have places like New Jersey, which basically passed an incentive, but then put it on hold because of, you know, they wanted to, you know, Governor Christie basically was worried about the cost of the state, and the state was not in a great position right now. So they said, you know, we want this incentive, we want to keep this incentive. We just can't afford it this year, so let's put it on hold this year and, you know, start it off again later on. And there's some other states basically like, you know, Virginia, which has passed one but doesn't come into effect until like 2013. So it really depends. I mean, other states are running into certain problems. I know one state that was sued for not paying out on one of its incentives, and I've heard rumors on some other states as well. So it really is trending, I think, on a state-by-state basis. I mean, I won't, you know, there's no reason for me to talk too much about the Canadian ones because we've got someone here from Canada, so I'll let them basically do it. I'll just be the voice of reason if I think they're lying. So.
Are there any Canadians in the room? Anybody from the Canadian government? Ha! Oh, that's all.
Was that?
Oh, hi. From Ontario. Yeah, well, close your ears. I think it's absolutely true that tax credits, they're not important. I think they're definitely becoming a cost of doing business. Like you've got to have them, but whether they're 15% or 20% or 25% or 30%, I mean, one of the booming economies in Canada has not been Ontario for many, many years. It's been British Columbia and Vancouver, where it really all started in Canada, when Electronic Arts bought a little company called Distinctive Software and grew a huge 2,000-person operation there.
And Vancouver, to your point, I think has the lowest incentives.
It has, well, it just introduced a 17.5% tax
So
rate.
up to now, though, you've got Lucas and all these big companies
Right.
without big incentives.
So it was really that momentum that they built around that big studio and all the spin-off studios, and then those studios got acquired, and it just kind of spun. And I think momentum and talent together are the two big driving factors. In Canada, in Ontario, we've been producing great both engineering talent and design talent, but we've had a pipeline down to Silicon Valley and a pipeline down to LA in animation for many, many years. So we trained them and we shipped them out. So I think Ontario has finally figured out a combination of incentives that are starting to bring some critical mass. So we just started a studio, an Ubisoft studio, which is going to grow to 800 people over the next 8 years. And we started to make a little bit of noise. And so overall, when Canada's story, people think about tax incentives, but it's it's a very big success in terms of being the third biggest game development country in the world right now. So the companies that have come there have not just come for the value. They've been outputting great product. It's it's sort of second to none in terms of what you get for the quality of work and the production values there.
So you're saying quality matters?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too.
Can I ask a quick question of the audience? It dawned on me that we haven't even actually described what we're talking about, incentives. Who actually knows what tax incentives are? And do we need to kind of give a little bit of overview?
Yeah, let's go tax incentives 101.
Yeah, why don't we say a little bit about it?
So I'll describe Louisiana just briefly. It's unemployed. You come to Louisiana, you spend money. I won't say any numbers because I'll just make it neutral. You come to Louisiana, you do a production, you spend money. In Louisiana, you get a tax credit back that you can sell to a third party, or you can use against your tax liability, but you probably don't have a big tax liability. So it's something you're going to sell. This is a model that came about through film, which Louisiana is really big in film production. There are other models. Sean, do you want to elaborate? It's fundable.
Yeah, most of these things come in different forms, and it's basically, there's going to be a percentage of what you're getting back based on your spending, and that spending can be very broad. In certain cases, it can be almost anything you're spending within that jurisdiction. You can get a percentage back on whether it's employee salaries, whether it's your rent, whether it's your equipment, all of those sort of things. What you get back could range in the U.S. anywhere from like 15 up to 42%. And so, as Elliot said, in some cases, what you do is, you might have, say you have an incentive after spending that's worth $1 million. But your tax liability in that jurisdiction is only $100,000. Well, great, your taxes are wiped, and then you have, what do you do with that $900,000? And so in certain jurisdictions, you sell it. Other jurisdictions, you don't have to, because the governments basically will say, well, that's great, you have a $900,000 kind of amount there. We'll cut you a check for that. Which obviously for certain companies, that's fantastic, and that's wonderful, and that's going to mean that they'll be able to develop another game or hire some more people and utilize that money in that way. And then there are other jurisdictions where you can't sell it, and you might not, and you don't get the money back, but you can reuse those incentives over the years. So maybe that incentive, next year you have a higher tax liability. Well, great, you can kind of roll these things over. That's generally the models on them.
Yeah, and that's a great overview. We don't want to focus too much on details, but I think it's a good idea, the mechanism, how that works. Tony, if I go back to you, Texas is not known for having a huge incentive, but you just said Facebook, Zynga, Google. What would you point to, or do you need an incentive, maybe is what I'm going to ask.
Well, I should probably clarify between the difference in digital media incentives and general business incentives. We do have a state level program that will refund 5% of production expenses for digital media companies. That includes games, that includes animation, film production, TV. But then there's also something called the Texas Enterprise Fund, which is a deal closing fund, which is contingent upon local participation. So you might get a tax credit from a local jurisdiction, and then that will allow you to leverage the state fund. And sometimes it's a 1-for-1 match, 100,000 from the local municipality, 100,000 from the state. Sometimes it's 1 to 4, 1 to 5. So there are a range of calculations that they can do based on the number of jobs being created and the economic impact of those wages. But Texas overall does not rank high in the incentives game because we have a very low tax climate for companies. So you might be getting tax incentives in another state predicated on taxes that don't even exist here. Like there's no corporate income tax, Business taxes are fairly low, and we have a very low cost to operate a business here. So if we played the incentives game too much, we'd be giving too much away, and a certain dollar amount per job, it just becomes, it doesn't, it's not in the best interest of taxpayer dollars to do that.
Yeah, sure. Well, I want to get to questions sooner than later. And one thing, before we do that, Ian, if you could talk about, because we talk about incentives, it's kind of the big government approach, but I also want to talk about what you've done in International Ontario, which is more of a trade approach, and how that differs. What are the activities you do? You do events, you do industry building?
Yeah, like I said, we work on behalf of the industry, so we're a member-based organization. Our companies pay an annual fee that ranges from $150 to $1,000 a year. Now, obviously, if you do the math on that, it still doesn't get you very much, because most of the companies are at the $150 range, not the $1,000 range. But our mandate on behalf of the companies is to create, we call it an ecosystem or a community, a hub where we can interconnect companies and we can find opportunities for them, and we can be their voice and speak on their behalf. And a lot of the economic incentives are set up mainly for inward investment purposes, for governments to attract jobs and to attract investment from outside of the jurisdiction. We want to make sure that our companies, domestically, are also represented. So we do a number of things as our business model, as an organization, which also tie into our mandate. We run 3 conferences. We run one on video game financing, actually, that we've started about 4 years ago. It's about 250 people, and we just did in January. We run one on transmedia, another one of those words that may not be around next year, but that's cross-platform. And we run an event on kids and interactive, and there's a very strong kids cluster in Toronto, which is the capital of Ontario. And so we do those events and then a lot of smaller events, and we attend trade shows and markets, and we help with branding both provincially and nationally. So we try to provide value back to our companies, and then we do a lot of work with the government and talking to them about what the needs of the industry are. And I think it's taken years and years and years. I think you guys, in Louisiana and you guys in Austin are lucky, because and in Singapore you seem to have very strong people on government. And there are some champions inside government, but it's hard to translate an economy like in Ontario, which is very much driven by the automotive industry, try to get them to understand the value of jobs in the digital media industry. And so I'm happy to say that after years of knocking on doors and preaching the good word, that they've kind of drank the Kool-Aid, so to speak, and digital media is one of the government's big priorities now. But having that voice, I think, has been very integral to the success that we've had.
And Tony, you recently, Governor Perry had Video Game Day, the State Video Game Day.
Right.
How did that come about?
That's exactly what he's talking about, is legislators failing to recognize the impact of the wages that the video game industry creates. So video game industry jobs pay on average like $80,000 a year on the development side. Even the IT and the management jobs pay over $100K. So the legislators in Texas is in a somewhat special place with its incentive. You're asking basically in the entire state of Texas to pay into a system from which Austin mainly benefits. There are lots of great studios in Dallas and lots of great studios in Houston, but the vast majority of game development happens in Austin. So the entire state pays into that system. But there are other industries where that happens too, like NASA. The entire state pays into the NASA system. That really only benefits Houston. So in order to create these strong clusters in the state of Texas, you have to do some very special things with incentives that may benefit certain geographies over the others.
And speaking of Austin in particular, why don't you tell us a little bit about that incubator? You said the city pays the $900,000.
Sure. Yeah, they're kind of sticking with the theme here. There are a couple of things that the city of Austin in particular does that change where big ideas happen, and one of those is the incubator. So the city of Austin gives about $900,000 a year to the incubator to generate new companies and new wealth and new jobs for the community. And based on the metrics, the IPOs and the job creation that happens out of those companies that graduate from the incubator, this is one of the most successful in the country and one of the most successful in the world. So Austin does a lot of other great things to foster this creative environment. It does art and public places programs. It does a great job of live music permitting. So like try and go to another city in small town America and get a live music permit downtown and see how many people you aggravate or you know, incense. And then
in New York, that's so easy.
and then imagine trying to do thousands of those permits per year in a place like Austin where you've got neighborhood groups that you know, maybe less tolerant than that. So you've also got Austin Studios, which is the film infrastructure asset that the city essentially gave the film industry for $1 per year at 51st and 35, which is the cheapest lease on a film asset you'll ever find in the country. And then, you know, the festivals and the things that they give police and EMS and fire resources to for free. So we're creating this ecosystem in which all areas of art thrive.
Joe Kim, one thing I want to follow up with you on from our conversation we had earlier. In Austin and San Francisco, tech centers like Boston, you have typically a lot of very risk-tolerant investment. Is that the case in Asia? Does the government need to step in and supplant a lack of risk-tolerant investment, or is there some burgeoning VC, sort of scene going on in Asia?
Well, in Singapore, right, it's strange. It's almost strange to hear that the government is trying to be more risk-taking, right? That's left to sort of VCs and investors. But it's actually true to some extent that in Singapore, in a country where we don't have a very long history of entrepreneurship and VC investing, government actually has to step up. But we are not in how we are doing it is not we becoming fund managers and investment managers ourselves, but rather we are trying to lower the risk profile of these funds, right? Attracting funds into the country, trying to reduce their risk profile so that they can then be more encouraged, right, to invest. So I think that's what's going on. There is the VC industry in Singapore is still nascent, and while there are VCs and foreign VCs also based in Singapore, what you'll find is some of the best and brightest still aspire to come to the US, and in particular Silicon Valley where I live, to actually pitch to VCs. But I will also say that having dealt with a lot of startups in recent years, right, it's really not the money, because money is cheap, and dumb money is everywhere. But really, you want some smarts behind that money too. I think that's what a good VC can bring to the table, a good investor. Certainly, government funding has some value, as if you are backed by a state or a national government, right? The government putting money in you, that itself is a validation, but it can only buy you that much.
Sure. Sean, companies you work with, do they care more about VC money? Do they care about tax breaks more? What's the driver for that?
It's going to depend on. It's really going to depend on the company. My clients range from iPhone app developers all the way up to the largest.
Let's talk small scale, just because we're here.
Yeah. Basically on the small scale, I think a lot of them are focusing. They're focusing on both, but they're focusing more on the VC side because, again, if you don't have money, you're not spending it and you're not getting an incentive back. So, and a lot of these incentives are something people should understand. Most of these states do have minimum spends. There's only a few states in the U.S. that doesn't matter how much you spend, you're still able to get these incentives. But other states might be $50,000 or can range up to a sliding scale up to like 500,000 or more. So I find a lot of my particular clients are more focused on the VC side because the type of games they're working on, they're saying, well, I'm going to need to have a team of, whatever, 5 to 10 people, and, maybe it's more, maybe it's 50 people, depending if it's a really big game. So they are looking for some sort of VC money, but then again, they're also looking for money from the publishers. So, I think funding is much more important to some of these clients than incentives. But, whether it's VC funding or funding from another source, depends.
Funding is something Canada has worked out in a sense.
Well, there's some really great opportunities for small companies. I think a lot of times, VC, when you're starting a company, always kind of looks terrific. Wow, I can take millions of dollars and build my product, but
and lose ownership.
It comes at a price, and it rarely happens, of course. What you really need when startup, it's a little bit of seed capital to start the ball rolling, to hire that first team, to get that first project done. And what we have in Canada is, I think, a wide variety of different tools in that area. We have something called the Canada Media Fund, which is our former television fund. And our television, the television broadcasting system in Canada is kind of a unique animal because we grew up alongside this 800-pound gorilla in the United States. We decided.
Pointing at me in particular.
No, it's just.
It is the United States.
We decided a long time ago that we needed to make some of our own content, and to be competitive, we set up some funding mechanisms, and those have kind of grown over the years. So there's a fund now called this Canada Media Fund, which is $350 million a year, which now goes not just to television, but to screen-based content. And $27 million of that goes directly into interactive digital media content. And the other money, if you're going to make a TV show in Canada, if you want the money, you also have to make an interactive platform production.
And that's not, just to point out, that's not funded by taxpayers, right?
That's not funded by taxpayers, it's funded by subscribers to the cable and satellite companies. All the funding for Television Canada has come from a proportion of gross revenue from cable and satellite. So, most people have television, so it's kind of a tax and not a tax. It's a regulatory induced fund. But it's kind of hidden, so it doesn't get hammered too much by the public. And and it is a significant amount of money, and it goes into a lot of high-risk projects. The $27 million are geared towards experimental media, and so it's that money that it is VC type money in a way, or micro VC, because you get up to $1 million from this fund per project, and it'll cover up to 70% of your budget.
Strings?
I'm just waiting for the tweets to come out. Canada says hide things from taxpayers.
No, I mean, like with any government fund, any government incentive or any government program,
I think it's also when your cable bill, there's 15 line items, and they're like 47 cents each.
it is not a line item on the cable bill, so.
What are the strings attached?
If you make money, you have to pay it back. Is that a string? Sure.
It's a loan, not a grant.
It started, this is a brand new program, in a way. It's kind of a merger of a few different programs. It started as taking some equity in the title of your project, but that was trashed actually midway through the year because it was so much complexity. So now it's really just, there's a repayment scheme, and if you profit from the project, you make money back, you pay back the government, and but they'll get out of the way. And so if you want to take that product, commercialize it, franchise it, whatever, that opportunity is there. So you're not encumbered for a long period of time. There are other funds too at the provincial level. There's the Interactive Digital Media Fund in Ontario, which is $2 million a year, which is a top-up fund. So if you've managed to call together 70 or 80% of your financing, and you're just looking for that last 20%, they'll put the last money in to trigger and make sure the project goes forward.
That's great. Joaquin, does Singapore want equity when they have their programs?
It's a combination. So there are incentives where you can just apply, and if you qualify, right, you get a straight up grant, right? And it's not that we don't take any shares. Government generally tries not to dabble in taking shares in companies because that has a lot of complexity that comes out of that. So most of the incentives that exist in Singapore actually are just straight up grants. And they're usually projects to seed off innovation, right? Get you off your feet, get your first beta, your first alpha prototype built. And then beyond that, there are other kinds of incentives that comes in. We do have our own investment wing, our own VC wing, but it typically does not invest in early stage companies. And it is really a strategic fund where a company may say, yes, we are taking private money, but we don't mind giving you a little bit, saving a little percentage to be government backed, just for a strategic purpose. So that's the extent of it.
To be clear, the government does not take equity in the company in Canada.
It's a very messy and
it's basically like a non-repayable loan. So if you don't make money, you don't pay it back. But yeah, we want the government owning part of the company.
I want to step back and share with people through Tony what a Chamber of Commerce does. Does anyone has a question right now, feel free to step up and we'll we'll slot you in soon. I don't want to have it totally segmented, but Tony, I had no idea what Chamber of Commerce did until 2 years ago. You kind of gave us a brief overview of how these folks might interface, whether we're in Austin or Raleigh or Seattle.
Sure. The Chamber of Commerce is a multifaceted place. The Austin Chamber's been around for 125 years. For about 100 of those years, it was an exclusively member-based organization that sought to connect businesses with other people that could help them or find them funding, and that's essentially the core operation as it exists today, is just kind of creating those business relationships. But in the past 25 years, the Chamber has taken on a much greater role, especially in Austin, on fighting issues that act as impediments to growth. So, for instance, transportation. The city has a strategic plan. The Chamber helps execute that plan and come up with strategies for increasing mass transit options here and reducing congestion. We spend millions of dollars every year on education initiatives, getting more kids through college, getting more kids college ready, increasing math and science curriculum. But my department specifically is the Economic Development Department, and we focus on growing companies here in Austin, creating an environment in which those companies can do well, and then attracting new companies to Austin. So sometimes.
Could you walk us through, I'm a developer, I've got 10 people, I've got a product. Chamber of Commerce to me connotes like golf courses and Google networks. What do I do with the Austin Chamber?
Was with a lot of stuff.
You know, in certain cases, you're right. Chamber of Commerce can be quite traditional at times, but we have a very innovative Chamber of Commerce in that if you are a small developer, we'd like to think that we understand your needs. I've been at the Chamber about 7 years working with creative media companies to help them find great real estate, stuff that doesn't appear on the map, stuff that doesn't appear on the radar, helping them reduce the cost of entry by helping them find avenues to funding, helping them get introduced to quality people that can act as executives on their board, helping them get into the Austin Technology Incubator, which does, in fact, take a percentage of equity in the company, and is funded by the city. So in effect, the city takes a very small, through the incubator, 1% equity share in the companies they fund. So we do, we're almost like a help phone that you pick up and call when you've got a problem with growing. So
is that, sorry to interrupt, is that if I'm a member, or is that if I'm just based in Austin?
Good point. The distinction between membership and non-membership is, are you creating jobs? And that's all we focus on in the Economic Development Department is, are you creating jobs and how much do they pay? So if you're a company, it doesn't matter if you're a member of the Chamber of Commerce or not, if you're going to add jobs within the greater Austin region, which is like 5 counties and about 2 million people, just shy of 2 million people, we want to talk to you and we want to help your company grow here and do well.
I want to add to that, which is this, if there are entrepreneurs in the audience here, I'm sure you have pitched to a VC before, right? And when you pitch to a VC, you sing the language of how much revenue you're going to make in the future, how much money you're going to make for the VC. How many of you actually have pitched the government, right? Whether it's the same thing. Actually, it's the same thing. But as what Tony has said.
Let's do a show of hands. Has anyone actually?
Has anyone pitched the government for support or for incentives before?
Yeah.
1, 2.
So a few people. Okay.
Yeah. You should pitch the same way you approach a VC, but just that the government is not too interested. Well, it's still interested in your revenue because that's tax dollars, but ultimately it's about jobs, right? Because the government exists to put people to work, and more jobs means more revenues for the city or a country. And so, if you think about that, right, and when you approach a government official, right, and say, hey, this is my company, we intend to grow this way, but we intend also to hire 100 people a year for the next 5 years, right? That is like music to a government official, right? You will get their attention. I mean, it's no secret that Microsoft, when it goes over, when they send a project to India, right, and they go to Indian government or China government and say, hey, I'm going to hire 5,000 people this year, they get the red carpet treatment, right? And governments, people on this panel, right, people like us, we can be incredibly supportive of your company, whether big or small, if you sing the right music, right, if you get your attention. And so that's something that you have to keep in mind as you're thinking of where to put your company, which state, which city. Be mindful that there's a lot of support that the government or the chambers can provide if you pitch the right pitch.
And I'll tell you a little bit about why those jobs are so important. When you create a high-tech job in your community that pays maybe $100,000, there's a multiplier effect. So it's going to go on and create maybe 1.7 or 2.5 new jobs. So as that person gets into the community and buys a house and buys a car, goes out and eats at restaurants and buys clothes, all of those things add to economic impact, which creates more jobs in other places.
Tony, does it matter if it's high tech? I mean, why the focus on high tech?
No, I mean, high-tech jobs just typically pay the most, but it could be a lawyer that goes, no offense, that goes out and pays a lot of money for stuff, and it could be somebody that earns a high manufacturing wage. It could be somebody that's a computer developer, a software developer, rather. So it's just high wages that tend to create those big impacts.
The interesting thing is sometimes it's what I've been finding when I speak to governments on it. It's not the creation of the job; it's the illusion that you're creating jobs. Because I pitched to New York State that they should extend their current film and television incentives to kind of new media areas. And they basically were like, well, how many jobs are we going to say we create? And we were talking about that. And I said, but also you guys have to consider the fact that you're currently losing jobs to other states. Like New Jersey has these things, Connecticut has these things. I can tell you of several companies and hundreds of jobs that have moved across the borders. And they were like, oh, we don't care about that. We don't care that we're losing jobs. We want to be able to go and have our politicians say, we've created 5 new jobs this week. They're not going to mention, we've lost 500.
Canada, do you care about losing jobs?
Get ready, tweeters.
Haven't had that problem for a while. Canada's games industry is one of the ones that's been tracked somewhat recently in terms of its growth, and it's been about 30% over the past few years. So I know we're somewhere, 2 years ago a year and a half ago, we were at about 14,000 game developers, so it's probably in the 17,000 to 18,000 person range now. So I mean, some of the challenges in Canada have been about talent getting thin on the ground in some of the clusters like Montreal because of the rapid influx. We had like 3 major studios just in the past, like last year, including Warner Brothers and Funcom, THQ.
Is there a risk of cannibalism? You bring in too many new companies and you poach away the talent that's working there already?
Well, you've got to be careful, I think, when you're going through that kind of growth, things can get messy. And obviously, things are very competitive on the ground in Montreal. In Ontario, we like to think we're kind of benefiting a little bit from that because we've got Montreal and Vancouver have created a great brand for video games in Canada. It's kind of, especially in Europe, people are very aware of what's going on in Canada. The British, the French, the Germans haven't been doing so well. They've suffered a lot of erosion in their games industry. So, there's certainly a lot of desire to move over to North America, and Canada is one of those destinations they want to go to. So, it's all about trying to plan things. In Ontario, we've got all that talent. For us, we can start to retain it now, and we've got a great value proposition. We've got the same sort of tax incentives. We've got the same labor pool. We've got even as good or better talent pool. Certainly a more readily available talent pool. So we're starting to sort of build our brand in that space. We've always been great at sort of the other interactive. We've got an amazing mobile industry, app developers, sort of at the yin yang. A really tight-knit group. We've had great web.
So to be clear, Canada doesn't incentivize the app developers. They don't get a tax credit, do they?
Certainly, anybody who's it depends what kind of app you're making. I mean, a lot of the programs are culturally focused, so you got to be making something that's kind of like a content or a media. It's not a B2C experience.
Enterprise software, for example.
Yeah, I mean, you can get R&D tax credits. Most jurisdictions have some kind of R&D tax credit at the federal level, at the provincial level. But if you're going in for some of these funds, or you're going for tax credits, then you've got to be delivering an experience to consumers at the other end.
I guess what I'm trying to suss out here is, a $100,000 job. Tony, if I'm understanding you, $100,000 job is a $100,000 job. Why not incentivize the mobile, all the mobile, and all the enterprise software folks and everyone else? Is there a strategy why one is better?
Well, when you talk about incentivizing something, you're essentially talking about using city resources. So you wouldn't believe the number of people it takes to run an incentive program inside of the city to make sure that the due diligence is done and make sure that the companies are getting the incentive and creating the jobs they say they are. But you want to incentivize areas of growth in between industries that are well established. So for instance, developing on mobile phones was new maybe 10, 15 years ago, but the Chamber of Commerce is convinced that there's even a convergence area between mobile and now regular computer graphics, so like the tablet area. So you're going to want to incentivize areas of the economy that are rapidly growing. So you don't want to incentivize a company that's going to come in and create 10 jobs when you could do an incentive to a company that's going to create 100 in a high growth mobile area or a high growth digital interactive area. So the government has to be somewhat careful, and the Chamber of Commerce has to be somewhat strategic in choosing the horse and betting on a horse. But you want to try and structure your incentives and structure your targeted marketing in a way that makes sense to capture the most growth.
I think the creative industries jobs have always been seen as the highest risk. If you're creating an ICT company, you have other tools and mechanisms to finance things, but traditionally, if you're making film or you're book publishing or sound recording, those are very, very high risk industries. So government has played a role in a lot of places. Culture is kind of treated differently than other industry. So government felt it had a role to play, and I think now we're seeing that muxing together, and where is the line drawn between something that's cultural and something that's truly technological? It's very hard to tell. I say a lot of our funds are bleeding over more towards technology now. That the Kennedy Fund, for example, will fund application software as long as it somehow underwrites or contributes to a sort of cultural or entertainment experience. So there's a lot of shades of gray, but I think we're moving more and more into, we're just trying to underwrite risk and the right kind of, the kind of risk that won't get underwritten in any other way. So we're just trying to sort of fill a gap in the market for capital.
Singapore seems a bit more agnostic. You guys just want the tech jobs, is that correct?
We want the tech jobs, the technology jobs, because they are sort of knowledge creating, IP creating. But I want to add to what this discussion thread about incentives. Incentives on a company level are very different from incentives on a personal level, right? And also we talked about talent. Companies will base the operations where the talent exists. And so what governments actually start to do, right, at least the Singapore government, is that we actually have to make the country a darn good place for talent to live, right? If you don't make, and that's very subtle. This is not, there's no such thing actually as tax incentives for an individual, right? There are for companies, but individuals are driven by, we want a safety, good schools, good recreation, arts and culture, stuff like that. So, and that's why the reason why San Francisco, New York, and London are great places to live and great, turns out they're also great hubs for talent in the creative field. Singapore is trying to emulate that too, and in fact, deliberately for the last, I would say, decade, Singapore government has been thinking carefully about some of the things that would be important to put in place, policies as well as infrastructure to put in place that will attract talent, because when the talent comes, guess what? Companies do come too. So again, this is sort of the global game that we all play now, right? We're in competition for talent, and if you're a top talent sitting out here in the audience, you have a choice of where you want to live in the world, oftentimes. And how governments can influence that choice, right? Actually, becomes very important where sort of big ideas happen.
You raise a great point. I mean, talent is so mobile, and it seems that talent can go anywhere. They can, a company can move. So once you get a company to Ontario, Austin, Singapore, how do you ensure they're going to stay? How do you influence them?
Should I take that one? I think you might want to ask the University of Texas what their retention rate is for graduates in this area. It's one of the highest in the country. It's about a third of all the people that have ever graduated from the University of Texas still live here in the Central Texas area. So there's a powerful magnetism that happens when somebody graduates from Austin or grows up in Austin or visits Austin. And I know that there are other places like that around the country, but it's experiential. When you go there, you say, oh my God, I had the best time. I went out every single night. I didn't stay in my hotel room. I met the coolest people. It was so diverse. I had so much fun. There was always something to do. Nothing was really all that expensive. I ate out of a food trailer, and like the cover was $5 for this awesome band that I saw. And so, I made new friends. So it's experiential, and I think with the way that the digital media community talks, word travels fast via Twitter, word travels fast via Facebook, images and media travel fast. So if you look at the rankings, the ratings and rankings that Austin achieves, we're like #1 for families, #1 for Hispanics, #1 for musicians, technology people, where to find a job. So it helps in promoting yourself, but it also it's more beneficial for us to promote the stuff that people have said about us. And so when you come to Austin, it's one of those places like Chicago or like it's one of those places where you really have a great time and you go back and you tend to talk about it and you tend to make it something that you go out of your way to tell other people.
I think you ask, why do companies stay? Why would they stay? I mean, companies are willing to stay because they're successful, because the economics are right. I mean, if they're not making money, if they're not making the best products, if they don't get access to the best talent, they'll leave. That's clear. I mean, why wouldn't they? In terms of attracting and keeping the talent itself, I think, it is all about a lot of different factors. It's the community really. I think at the end of the day, people want to go where other people are going, where success is happening, where they can, learn from mentors, where, there's a thriving scene. So, that's always going to attract the top talent. That's what Hollywood is. It's that sort of spinning, vortex of great talent that just sucks more talent in. And so, I think on that side of the equation, there are so many different ingredients, but momentum, I think, is probably the strongest one.
But also don't discount the cost of moving. I mean, no matter if your company is small or large, there's quite a lot involved in moving to a new location. So, it's unlikely you're going to move your whole operation if you're EA to get another percentage point from some location. It has to be something that's like changing the nature of the game. The same thing if you're a small company. You may not be able to afford to move. So you may not be able to afford to basically shut down, and the expectation that you're going to probably have to hire new employees in a new area because not all of your employees, for what small amount you might be paying them, might be willing to move to Detroit.
So something big like, say, a $75 million loan guarantee, as an example.
That could be helpful. I mean, there's you look at 38 Studios. Basically, they were based in Maynard, Massachusetts, and basically Massachusetts has no tax incentive. They are looking to put one through now, I think, probably because of what happened. But basically, Rhode Island, which does provide a tax incentive, and approached 38 Studios and said, guys, you should be here. We're only a few miles away. And through negotiations to put the icing on the cake, they also ended up saying, we'll give you a $75 million loan. So obviously something like that is going to be significant for a company to basically move for.
Show of hands, anybody interested in a $75 million loan?
Elliot, I should probably touch on that real quick, and before we started, I jotted
Are you offering them?
No, we really don't have a mechanism like that. That's pretty extraordinary, actually. The companies that I was just remembering off the top of my head that have invested here, listen to these, and then I'll tell you the underlying characteristic of all of their moves. Electronic Arts, Disney, Zynga, Bethesda Softworks, Facebook, Twisted Pixel, Lightbox Interactive, THQ, Activision Blizzard, and Nintendo have all come here within the past 6 years. There's countless more that I forgot, but none of those have received an incentive, except for Facebook. But that's not really a gaming company. So in the video game realm, none of them have received a deal closing or a programmatic incentive outside of the 5% production credit that they all get. That's just a thing that all game companies get across the board as long as they're doing the right things. But none of them have been specifically incentivized by the city to come here other than just getting that one tax credit or rebate.
And you felt like Facebook deserved something extra?
Facebook was not qualifying for the game incentive because they don't do any game development here. They don't make any moving images, so that required some special attention from the city council, and the marquee name kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah. We just have a few minutes. Any questions, folks? Thanks.
The last point. Do you guys feel like creating a regulatory framework that enables certain people who know how to navigate that regulatory framework to get rebates, get incentives? Do you feel like that entire structure kind of, imposes a higher barrier of entry for independents, little people, who don't want to deal with a lot of bureaucracy, don't want to deal with a lot of.
Let me speak to that from my point of view. So at the state of Louisiana, that's an issue, right? We're in the state capital annex in Baton Rouge. You know, your game company is probably in New Orleans. You know, you've never been there, you don't understand, you don't know where to start. It's an issue we try to deal with a lot, because what you're saying is exactly true. You know, if you don't have a lobbyist or an attorney or someone, we still want you to be able to develop an iPhone game and get the incentive. I think it's a problem. You know, I think that some of the states you look at, maybe Sean, you can speak to this, some of the states, you look at how it maps out, it's like, I think it was Florida, one of the big publishers with 2 initials got all the incentive because they were the first to door, right? So there's an equity issue that, yeah, it's your local jurisdiction you want to probably address.
Definitely. I mean, that's actually one of the reasons why I wrote the white paper, because I had so many clients and even just people I met at conferences asking me, you know, hey, how do I get these things? And so I did a summary basically of every state and said, you know, here are the contact people, here's who you want to talk to, here's the summary of what you need to do. And it's really important to look at those areas and look at, you know, which jurisdiction you want to potentially apply to, because you can fall into that problem of Florida where these incentives that might be limited, you know, are all eaten up by a large company. And other places, you need to make certain that you're following the path properly, because some jurisdictions require that you apply for them before you even begin making the game. And then you have to basically be approved in advance. And, you know, then you're going to be providing them information as the process, you know, is underway. And at the end of it, you kind of close it up and you get your incentives based on that. Whereas other states, basically, you know, they don't care. Basically, at the end of the year, you can put in all of your stuff and basically, you know, be, you know, eligible as anybody else is with the
I've got a second part really, because it was a two-parter. Are you guys looking at co-working, like the co-working movement, the shared office space movement as an alternative to, you know, like, because then you're
I'm sorry, alternative to what?
alternative to any type of like regulatory incentive system. I mean, because one area you're trying to cultivate, you know, you're encouraging people to come kind of cultivate their talent and their participation.
It's like with the Austin incubator, it's from the bottom up, and there's a few co-working spaces in Louisiana that we try to support, one of which has a Techstars, Y Combinator sort of incubator coming up. So it's definitely, we want to see companies, we can be where we are and grow where we are, we don't have to bring in from out of state. We also want to, you know, try to jumpstart things, I guess, by bringing in big shots.
I was going to say, you know, in terms of overhead, it's certainly, you know, you're never going to find money that comes free. You know, with government money, a lot of times it's an investment of time and overhead and learning, and then relationship management and reporting. So there's a back end to taking that money, you know, which, you know, does cost you in your time, and you know, it can be complicated. You know, there's a lot of paperwork that needs to be done. So you have to sort of build that into, is it really worth it? You know, where I am, you know, it may not be worth it if you're only claiming $5,000 because it may take you, you know, 80 hours to kind of go through all of the reports and things you have to do to get the money. So it's one of those things where, you know, there is no such thing as a free lunch, but, you know, certainly at a certain scale, it can make a lot of sense.
That's a great question, by the way, because I've constantly stressed to anybody that I've ever talked to about this industry that co-locating or co-working, as you call it, or being incubated just by being in close proximity to other companies is one of the best things that governments can possibly do. And there are a couple of co-locating or co-networking spaces around town in Austin, but one of the biggest opportunities that we've got coming up for a massive investment by the city and that type of environment on a massive scale is the Texas National Guard Armory, which is a 120,000 square foot building that becomes available in 2012. And it sits right where Robert Rodriguez's studios and Austin Film Society's production headquarters and Austin Studios is right in the middle of the city. And so once they rehab that building and flesh it out with production space and office space, it's going to be awesome. You'll be in there with, you know, 100 other creative people every single day or more.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks for the question. That's incredible. We're about out of time. Let's get any more questions. Please, set the mic if you don't mind. There is one thing, just before you use the mic. I'll have to best Tony on this. If anyone hasn't heard of Startup Chile, go home and Google it. They're offering money and a work visa and a place to live, and they're aiming to get like 1,000 startup teams to Santiago in the next year. It's an amazing government that could be, just again, raising the bar, please.
Two quick questions that are loaded and probably can't answer in 5 minutes, but curious anyways. One, is there dangers in trying to pick winners via incentives, and what does that do to the ecosystem? When you talk about trying to generate big ideas, generally if you're doing incentives, you're going after ideas that already exist, or are you really innovating by incentivizing growth?
Yeah.
The second thing is economic development measurement currently broken, meaning that we currently say that success is new job creation, and in reality the areas that are burgeoning are the ones that are actually wealth generators, not job generators. What I mean by this is, if you look at the best companies in the world, the Googles, the Facebooks, the reason that they're highly successful is because their revenue per employee is extremely high. Because their employees are extremely wealthy, they break off and start new companies to generate new wealth, and it's a cyclical. You have things like the PayPal Mafia. If you look at almost every startup in Silicon Valley, their money originally came from people from the PayPal Mafia. So are we actually hurting ourselves in economic development by taking industrialized thinking that says the more line production employees you have, the more economic wealth you're generating, when in reality, a single person can generate a whole lot of wealth because they don't need capital manufacturing in order to generate wealth today?
Yeah, well, since we only have 2 minutes, the second part of your question, I think the ecosystem that we're all advocating speaks to that. If PayPal comes in and spins out lots of companies from employees who leave, then I think it addresses the issue you're talking about. The first piece, making good or bad bets, it's always an issue. Rhode Island was dinged really heavily by a lot of people because they made a massive bet on one company. With a statutory incentive, anyone in the state can use it, and so it's a tool that is, it's available to all. It's not making bets so much as offering up equal treatment for anyone in the sector. That's a different thing, but certainly there's danger in a discretionary available. Let's one more. Yeah, let's do it.
We're all very fortunate to come from areas that seem to be embracing the new media and these new economic engines, Austin, New York, and Ontario, and it seems Louisiana is boosting it as well. Currently in DC, but I'm originally from Kentucky, and I've had the opportunity to work on grant proposals and pitching companies to programs that already exist, but when you're going into a place that's a little bit more skeptical of these new economic engines, and you want them to start these programs, how do you pitch that to, perhaps to use a little bit of an inflammatory term, a council that may be a little on the Luddite side and doesn't believe that jobs in emerging technology markets are actually jobs? Unless you're manufacturing things, I'm being from Kentucky, unless you're manufacturing, it's not really a job. How do you convince them to start these programs?
Well, I'll just say quickly and let someone else add to this. There's a tidal wave of understanding of including across municipalities and legislatures where they're saying, manufacturing is moved overseas. What fills the void of jobs in America? So I think there is a sea change happening, but specifically on tactics, I don't know if anyone has any.
I mean, having actually tried to do that in New York State, I have no idea because we failed. They really didn't seem interested, and they asked us to do things which we did, and they ignored it, and then said they would provide us with information and models of what other groups have done, and they never did. Yeah, I mean, I think it's it's one of those things where it depends who you're dealing with, and it may need to be that because I was involved in lobbying on a New York City and New York State level, and we did not get the people spoke to us, but I still remember one of the conversations where the first person came in and for 20 minutes talked about how they're not going to do anything, and then asked us basically what we were there about.
Sean, did you have a lobbyist, or were you the sole lobbyist?
No, I mean, we did not have an official lobbyist, although there have been there are different groups that were approaching this from different areas. I was kind of the counsel to one of the groups, but also there were Activate Blizzard basically was approaching using a lobbyist, and so we were doing 2 different routes, and the success on either side was not good.
there is an answer to that question, and I think it lies at the university level. You can go around city governments and use your academic resources to be able to incentivize companies to come. And case in point, the University of Texas was incentivizing companies to come here long before the city government ever got involved in incentives. With IBM in the 60s, with Cemetech in the 70s and 80s, it was, these are long processes, but they really hinge on universities. So the University of Texas, Austin is what it is because of UT, it's everything.
It's interesting, that's actually one of the things that has been working in New York, is a lot of the universities have kind of gotten together and, they've realized how much technology they've created and the specialization that their professors have, and they have been